I would like to welcome you to the Fanfare United Kingdom. I came just suddenly on the idea to make it a little different. As usually, we are writing reviews and advertise CDs, which
Yeah.
is a little archive. A little like you put it into the desk. So after the pandemics, we all were asking us, what can we do to save our art? Because suddenly it was like a feeling: does they really need us in a way? Yeah.
Mm.
And I thought that the only right approach might be to turn back, face to the audience and to try to be personal, not only when people are coming to the concert and listening what we are playing, but also in between of our kitchen, and to get to know us as personally.
Sense.
So that was what I thought to change also among all different things. And then it was really it was a coincidence that my colleague Colin Clark couldn't go and review your recital in Wigmar Hall, and he asked me to step in. And I said, I'm not in London, I'm in Switzerland, where I'm based, and I can't easily. And to my shame, I didn't know you at all. I'm really ashamed of this. And because and then he said, I say, okay, but I would love to make an interview with you in this my new form, but I can't do it if I never heard your playing. So I've got this album of Beethoven, which, first of all, I'm admiring your work deeply. So all what I did right in these questions is all honestly, I'm really totally fascinated because it is just admirable. And also for me, Beethoven, it was also a coincidence because I was working like for 2 years on a new Beethoven edition of violin and cello sonatas, in the version for piano and viola for the first time, with totally new things inside of the music, like also in editing.
Are you a violist?
I'm viola player, yeah. And so I was working on Beethoven like for 2 years, really. And then suddenly comes your recording, and so it fascinates me totally. I just would like to start with the question: how did you came? How long did it take you to came to the point to record several Beethoven sonatas, and why?
Well, I have been fixated on the Beethoven sonatas for as long as I remember. I can't even point to a time in my life when this music wasn't important to me. I think certainly from when I was 9 or 10, it was the music that pulled me in the most. And I think with pieces like that, which are sort of infinitely interesting, you never will come to the day where you think, oh, now I'm ready. Now I can do it. So at a certain point, you have to just take the plunge. You have to have the trust that the work that you have done is interesting enough and important enough that you have something to say about it. And for me, a recording is never an end point. If I were to record the Beethoven sonatas again in 5 years or 15 years or 25 years, for sure, I will have come further with them. But for me, that's not an argument not to do it. That recording takes you deeper, and I wanted to go deeper into the music, so it made sense for that reason alone.
How old have you been when you played Beethoven for the first time?
When I played Beethoven for the first time, probably about 10 or 11 years old. Yes, I remember already being 10 and playing the Sonata Opus 26. So yeah, I mean, it's been with me for, virtually all of my life. And I remember hearing pieces like the Appassionata Sonata from even earlier than that, and them making a humongous impression on me from the first time that I encountered them.
So what I'm noticing in your playing, so I'm almost something like in the middle of the volume. You're very, very careful. Your careful approach with text and articulations, and this combination between being very carefully with what is written in the musical text, like a Jewish Kohen, really, and then there still be space for free esprit, and that makes it so really unique. I must say, for example, we have a reference of very intellectual approach to musical interpretation by Sviatoslav Richter.
Mm-hmm.
And there is everything like in stone for me. I'm Russian, so I studied my entire life with this Russian tradition. And that was disturbing me for my entire life, that everything is like in stone. It's never really up to date, and the space to be up to date and do something new and bring some new emotions is really little. And what you are doing is you are combining this intellectual, real clear approach to exactly what is written and how the articulation works. And it's really, really, I can really prove it that is amazingly close to what is, how did he write his music. And then suddenly this romantic spirit, and for first time, really hearable connection with Chopin. How did you came to this?
Well, I don't think there is a contradiction between being faithful to what's in the score and on the one hand, and on the other hand, being free. I think when you're dealing with great music, that the information in the music, the information in the score, I should say, offers enormous possibilities. If you play a piece by a second or a third-rate composer, maybe not. But if you play a piece by someone with the imagination of Beethoven and with the inner strength of Beethoven, if you explore the meaning behind all of the markings in the music, then it opens up a whole world of possibility and a whole world of expression and a whole world of emotional power. So I actually find that the more deeply I go into this music, the more free I feel and the more possibility for, I don't know if improvisation is the word, but for experimentation. So actually that, for me, I think that's how I decide what music I want to play. I want to play music where the longer I spend with it and the deeper I go into it, the larger it becomes.
And how do you work with musical text? So let's say we speak to audience, to non-musical audience, people who are music lovers. So let's try to show how do you work if you're opening for first time and second time and third time. For me, personally, I'm opening every time anew. And I really like to change the music. I really like to start anew every next time I work with one and the same piece, just to don't be influenced by myself. So how do you do this?
Well, I would say two things. First of all, I think even though study is incredibly important, instinct does have to come first. So I begin by trying to really locate what it is in the music that I love, and love is an instinctual thing, right? Love is not an intellectual thing. So that has to come first, and then the study and the examination of what's in the music begins. So I think that's very important to say that that's the order of events. But the other thing I would say is that I try to work from the outside in, that I don't want to begin with details. I want to begin by trying to have some sort of overall picture of what is the structure of a piece, what is the message of the piece, and then once the sort of the architecture is in place, then I look more and more locally to try to understand what is happening on the moment-to-moment level. I think it's much easier to go from outside in than inside out.
So you work with voicing, which is really extremely interesting placed. Is it all the time intention or sometimes also just instinct and intuitive?
Sometimes it is intuitive, yeah. And those sorts of details change. Again, I if I talk about architecture, the big picture of a piece by Beethoven does not change, but on one particular day, a detail such as the way a chord is voiced might strike me differently, and even after the fact, I'm not sure I could tell you why. I think sometimes it's something really very instinctual.
And which edition is your favorite? What do you think? Which sort? First of all, so I'm also musical editor, and for me, everything starts with edition, even though if you see how we really, you can find me silly, but if the paper is darker, I like it more.
Yeah.
So I prefer old editions more than brilliant, nice, Henley.
Yeah.
I just do. And I even don't know why. I just see and I like it. And then I have better feelings to play the music. Or sometimes it's placed, it's small, it's sort of strange. And then to me, music seems more difficult than it is.
Yeah.
So how is this for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. With the Beethoven sonatas, I worked out of several editions, which is not usually the case with me. But I grew up with the Schenker edition, which I won't even say that I love it, but it feels like home because I knew it from the time I was 10 years old. And more recently, I came to the Henley, which I used as kind of a I don't know if I would say a reference point or a counterpoint. That if there was something in the Henley that seemed strange to me, then I would go to the Henley just as to do a cross reference. And of course, what's amazing now is very often you can find manuscripts online, which now so much more material is available. And then the other edition, which I have used for the Beethoven sonatas, is Schnabel's edition, which is mostly just because I think he is, what for me, the most inspiring performer of that music. And so obviously it's a completely subjective view, and I would never think of it as any kind of urtext, but I'm always just interested to know what his thought process was. So as I've worked on the Beethoven sonatas, I went back and forth between those three. But Schenker is, for lack of a better word, home to me.
So do you think it still be important to keep editing and make new editions for Beethoven, or we have enough of Beethoven editions and we shall not do anything new? What do you think?
Well, I think that with someone like Beethoven, whose handwriting was such a disaster, and who also was so specific in the way he marked his music, I think there's always room for more editions. I mean, there's been very interesting research, for example, recently about the late string quartets and the way he notated dynamics. So given that his markings are complicated, specific, and extremely difficult to read, I think there's definitely always room for new scholarship.
Definitely. For me, it opened the world. I was almost done with the edition. And suddenly I said, okay, I have to check it back to the manuscript. And suddenly I discovered something very, very strange, that he's changing the way of writing down the articulation between the piano part and the string part.
Yeah.
So we have 8 bars, wedges in the piano part, but at the same time, either is nothing in the violin part, or maybe Dutch or something different. And then editors started to equalize this because they thought that Beethoven made a mistake, but he didn't make a mistake. If we do, so basically we all have all the time the question, how can we solve the balance problem between a piano with 75 to 80 strings and a poor violin or cello with 4? It can never work. But so we can never oversound the piano, even if you never push down any pedal. It's impossible. So the only solution is to be all the time a little bit offbeat, not together. And exactly this he's writing in this score. If you do different articulation on the same passage, then you're a tiny bit not together. And then you never have any sort of balance issue.
No, I will say that that's very interesting. And in general, the kind of editing that really bothers me is when the editor assumes that the composer made a mistake, because you can write a note as an editor saying this is different and we don't understand why it's different, but to just simply equalize what the composer wrote and not inform the person who's studying it that this was an editorial decision and not what the composer, that really makes me angry, because with the great composers, usually the markings are there for a reason,
Exactly. It's also a little bit like, we are reading a newspaper and there's written certain information. And then it comes through the editorial, I don't know when, and you start to a little bit change or equalize or slightly, do something better in the content. So at the end of the day, we have completely another story in this newspaper is what was written. So if I don't know, person XY did headed someone on the one reason, we have at the end of the day totally different story. Something like it was I don't know what, and the head was somewhere on the Mars, and this is fake news. And so in the musical text, in the musical score, there are so many fake news, like in the past 200 years, which brought us to the state of why is it so boring that our concert halls are almost empty? Because the contents are not there anymore. Because we can't read it exactly. We don't know what does it really mean. So it's like a little bit, let's declamate Japanese poetry without have any knowledge of Japan.
Exactly.
What can it be? It sounds nice, but not speaking so much. And so back to the content in the musical text, this bothering question of tradition and historical authenticity. Everyone is, I don't know, did you all the time study in the United States, or you have been abroad in Europe?
I only studied in the United States, but I've much of my career has been abroad, and many of my influences have also been abroad. So I'm not sure that my musical background is particularly American.
So I know. So I did study in Vienna for the first part of my studies, and this was all the time like a brainwash of historical articulation. And I remember I was like 14 when I started, and I was easy to talk. And I have asked this teacher in the chamber music, a pianist, have you been standing next to Mozart?
Yeah.
Why do you know this so exactly? How did Mozart write this wedge and this dot? Why? Why do you screaming at me? I don't want to put this Christian, but still if we hear some Soviet recordings of Mozart or Beethoven, okay, I have to admit. Yeah. And even some Karajan's recording like Dolby Digital Surround sounds, it's not really how it had to sound. So where is this golden point? How can we find it? Where is historical? Where can be free? Where's the style? What is the style of Beethoven, Mozart, Bach? What are we going to do with this?
I will say two things. First of all, in music, as in politics, I'm very frightened of ideologues. People who are absolutely certain that they know how this music is supposed to sound. To me, those people are frightening. Because when you're dealing with great music that's 100 or 200 or 300 years old, you cannot know for sure. I mean, and a person who will not admit that to me is dangerously arrogant. That's number one. And number two, I think that the search for authenticity has to be individual. That every musician's responsibility in their own work and in their own relationship with, let's say, Beethoven, but it could be true of Bach also, is to study the score and to listen. And in that study and in that listening, to find your own truth, I would say, about the music. And that is, for me, the only kind of authenticity that means anything in the end. If it's an authenticity based on what someone else told you, then that's inauthentic in another kind of way, So I think, there are, of course, questions of style where we try to gather as much information as we can based on letters and historical accounts of how people played, but that is very imprecise, So in the end, our own judgment based on our study of the score combined with our instinct, that is the only way towards any kind of meaningful authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we turn it back to amateur musicians, because I'm convinced, for example, that we can increase the amount of audience in the hall if we make people who are amateur musicians more confident to play and to make music and don't feel them to be like of a second sword. Just if you think back, even Beethoven, Liszt, Paganini, maybe less, but everyone was mainly writing for amateurs and less
Yeah.
for their students.
Yeah.
Also Chopin, every piece is almost dedicated to a female student of Chopin. So how can you, I would like to encourage everyone to play with us professionals and to be more free in dealing with the music. So let's say we have a question, we have a very, very difficult piece, but someone who is an amateur would like to play even, and why not? Let's say if you and me, we are also writers, and we have to be confident that we can write something, write a story, libretto, a book, and be confident in this. And of course, we never, or I don't know about you, but me, I can never be compared to a writer who never was a musician and spent the entire life with writing.
Yeah.
And so, do you think how far in the matter of editing can we go? Can we slightly make easier some parts? Can we adjust something? Can be there an amateur edition of every piece that people are able to enjoy the music and performance, or rather not?
I never thought about it, so I wouldn't want to answer without having given it some serious thought. I know historically it happened, of course. I'm thinking, I mean, there are so many examples, but I'm thinking, for example, that the Schubert G flat major impromptu was published also in G major because someone thought it was easier for an amateur pianist. I'm not actually sure it was, but they thought it was. And Beethoven even said about the Hammerklavier, that I think it was for the British publication, that you can switch the order of the movements if it seems too complicated otherwise. So there is a historical precedent for it, for sure. And the other thing I will say is that I don't think we do ourselves any favors by making the audience think that they need to be frightened of music. That's for sure. But in terms of the specifics of that, again, I would need to think about it more before I would give an answer.
Yeah, so I think just for future amateur editions, especially, might help us to get people not only back, but even in you. There are young people who are deadly frightened of everything what has to do with classical music. Young people like in their teens or under 20, they think we sleep in the coffin, something like this.
Yeah.
And then we don't need to wonder that we are not earning enough. Of course, we are not. But it doesn't mean that we can change it, just because it changed so much after the Second World War. So if we come back and think, what happened to the art? Just think in the 30s, it was like 70 to 80% of contemporary music played on stage, and then 30% of older music, like Mendelssohn brought Bach, and it was a sensation. Such an old stuff on stage. Who want to listen to this? And now we are in a completely
the other way around. Yeah.
And of course, I have to admit. So I'm also not the biggest, happiest person to be sitting and listening to Pierre Boulez for an hour. Really not. And so much I do play contemporary pieces, I'm not, and nobody can be blamed for this. So, but what actually happened with the society? What happened to us? Why all the time everyone is speaking about how are we playing? How is our technique? If you make mistakes or not. Lately, a couple of months before you, Maurizio Pollini gave a recital in London, and many things has happened. And I must say, Maurizio Pollini is quite over 80.
Yeah.
And then I did read a critique that he has lost his dignity, and I had to really reply to it, because it's, in my eyes, it's unimaginable to say something like this. If you go to listen to an artist who is on stage for 60 years and longer, and it is him, you are not going there to hear that he's not making any mistakes, having no health issues. You are going to listen something what only he is able to provide us with information, which reached so far back in the century. So why is this possible? What happened to all of us?
Well, I think many things happened, but one thing which happened, which I think in some ways was very, very damaging, was that music went from, if you go back long enough, it was played mostly in the house, and then it was played mostly in the concert hall, and now it's played mostly on recordings. And when recordings first began to exist, concerts were still the point. And you bought a recording because maybe you wanted something which reminded you of a concert. But as recordings became more and more dominant, and as they became more and more overproduced, I think it flipped, and now people want the concerts to sound like their recordings, which I think is very, very dangerous. First of all, it makes people unbelievably intolerant of imperfections, and imperfections are where the life is. A world that is perfect is ultimately completely uninteresting. So that's number one. But I would say beyond that, people don't want to hear something new. They want to hear a reproduction of something that already was done. So I think the proliferation of recording is definitely part of the issue here, of turning music into something much more inflexible, and less alive. I don't think that's the whole answer, but I think that's definitely a part of it.
Right, and still, it's very important point to say that the recording is never replacing a live performance, because when we are going to a live performance, we are sharing. To me, it's a sort of an act of self-sacrifice. We are going there, blooding and experiencing all we have with the composer. It's a huge communication between composer, who is all the time alive when we are playing and interpreting the music, and the audience is there, and this is a huge exchange. And no recording can ever replace that. And this why it can't be perfect, because perfect is something. Busoni has said that perfection is something like a dead mark, something what is already dead. And this why a recording and not a live performance. This term of live performance means it is not perfect, and it can't be
not dead, and therefore not perfect.
It's not perfect, and that's why you are coming to the hall and drink our blood, let's say, and not please counting our mistakes, because it's just mean from people, in my opinion. And it still be this way. And also, I think, back to the programming music, all of us who did experience some organizing of concert role or something like this, people are extremely intolerant with unknown music, with music they never heard. They want to have Schubert sonatas. I must say, I've played like 15 years, and I've played 35 sonatas, and I've recorded 5 albums. But the one piece I've played probably mostly is arpeggione sonata. If they call you play viola, I would like to hear arpeggione. And you say, okay, but there's so many other things to play.
Yeah.
Why all the time? Like a breakfast menu. Arpeggione, Brahms, and Schumann. So what happened? Why is everyone so afraid to taste something new? To also, for example, the story about the transcription. This is something almost very, 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 very dangerous. And if you say you play transcriptions and you do transcriptions and you publish transcriptions, and there's something like maybe breaking the law of something, I don't know of what, but and think back again, Liszt was making transcriptions through his life from operas, and there's a brilliant CD, An Art of Transcription, also on the piano. It's fabulous. So why is everyone so intolerant with unknown repertoire?
Well, I think you used the word fear, and I think that because classical music doesn't have the biggest audience, and because it's definitely not at the center of culture, I think that we are operating from a position of fear very often, concert promoters and even performers, and beyond the question of transcriptions, which is just a part of it, I think that operating from a position of fear is never a good idea. Maybe not as a person, but for sure not as an artist. I think that you have to approach decision-making about what you play and how you play based on, I wouldn't even say confidence, I would say belief in the power, the possibility of reaching people in a meaningful way. And I think that our fears, our insecurities about what we do and whether it matters and whether people want to hear it have led us to behave in a defensive way. And I think that's a mistake.
Right, I'm completely with you. And also, you bring the recording of Beethoven. Everyone, we are growing up with saying Beethoven was a revolutionary composer. He loves revolution. Yes, he did. And so I say it was Beethoven year 2020, and you remember all the scattered recordings we all had and concerts to honor Beethoven. And here we go. Every concert was canceled.
Yeah.
To me, that was really Beethoven's year.
Yes.
Forever and ever.
So I heard someone make a joke that it was like a Beethoven crescendo followed by a subito piano, which that was what happened in the Beethoven year.
Exactly. So if we see what actually makes Beethoven to a revolutionist, how much is he really devoted to any revolution? What is his personal revolution as a composer? Where did he start? Where did he came? All of us who did journey with Beethoven from early opuses to the very late, also like in the cello sonatas, we can see this evolution. To me, Beethoven was very much inside of himself, fighting himself, his feelings, and dealing with himself. To me, he wasn't someone who really cares so much about the society, but actually about his own him. And at the end, to me, again, he brought out of any frames. Like he stayed deaf, he could hear only himself. And he was like, in the space, out in the stratosphere. So what, in your opinion, what was his way? And where's the Beethoven's revolution?
Well, even though it is true that the late pieces are from some other universe, I actually think that Beethoven's, two things. First of all, I think that his fundamental personality is completely in place from Opus 1 already. That, first of all, there is an enormous spirituality in Beethoven, and you hear that from the earliest pieces. And there is humongous intensity, that whatever he is expressing the most, whether it is anger or humor or joy or tenderness. There is tenderness also. He does it to the nth power all the time, and you feel that from the very, very beginning. So that's the one thing that I would say, is that that his personality is gigantic and consistent through his whole life, even as the language changed. The other thing I would say is that I think that he was constantly searching. That if you look at for example, the 32 sonatas, but you could equally talk about the 16 string quartets, he never repeats a structure twice. That as soon as he writes a work in which he gives himself a compositional problem and he solves it, he's not interested in that one anymore. He wants to try something different. And so there is this restless need to invent that I find is really at the center of his personality. And that I think it's what kept him alive, that he had a basically miserable life even aside from the deafness, which is obviously a horrible tragedy, but his almost none of the facts of his life are happy. But his need to invent and his need to express himself through music kept him alive.
Yeah, and this is a revolution, actually, to accept the things the way they are, but go on and move forward. And yeah, that's true. That's pretty right. Back to the question with the crossovering, how do you see the point should the classical music stay in the genre, or we can make crossovering among another genres of classical art? Let's say I did write to you. So just my idea, my vision is that we can combine literature and music more in one. And if we can make music to a story, so I do stories to the music because I see stories in the music. Do you?
Usually not literal stories. I'm very interested in the idea, and I mean, obviously there are so many examples. I mean, you think of just to name one, Janacek using the Tolstoy, the Kreutzer Sonata as the basis for the string quartet. From I don't think that there's any reason not to combine the arts. I think there have been so many projects that have done so very, very interestingly. For me personally, the magic of music is that it expresses something about humanity that cannot be expressed with words or, in fact, in any other art form. So again, personally, I'm most interested in that aspect of music, which is completely unique and actually cannot be related to the other arts. But that's personal. I think that there are all sorts of interesting ways of combining words and music, visual art and music, dance and music. So I'm not opposed to it in any way. It's just not it's not where my relationship to music lies.
In your programs, do you combine jazz or you don't? This classical other piece.
I haven't, but I think I don't have any objection to it at all. I think, I mean, so I'm not the first person to say this, that the only two kinds of music are good music and bad music, So there's absolutely no reason that an intelligent and creative programmer couldn't combine jazz and music and classical music and do it in a way that would be interesting and give new context to the classical music.
Yeah, to me, for example, it's all together. But as soon as coming to the crossovering, personally, my traditional Jewish Russian background is shouting no pop music in the classical program. And if I was involved in a dispute like a couple of months ago, a year ago, with about students in London. They say, why can't we do some Beatles inside of the musical program of the students? And I say, it's simply not kosher. Do not combine milk and meat. Meat is nice, milk is nice, but please not together. It can't digest properly. So to me, it's just the only right way to express this. How it's about you?
Well, I think that very often the discussion about questions like this is not happening in the right way, because I find that there are a lot of people, certainly in our world, the classical music world, who think that because something is a tradition, it is automatically good. And then I find other people who are saying the only way to save music is to throw away the traditions. And neither of those positions is actually interested in the question of, is the tradition good? Does it have some value? Does it give it? Are we gaining something by this tradition? Because that's the question in the end that is important to me. And again, I think there are probably ways of combining classical music, whatever that means, classical music and popular music, that could be interesting. I think there are a lot of ways of doing it that would be absolutely horrible. And so I think it's really the question of how it's done, whether it is done with sincerity and with a clear idea of why. That would be the question. So I'm not familiar enough with other kinds of music to speak intelligently about it, but I don't think we should be closed off to the idea just because it's new. I don't think we should embrace the idea just because it's new. I think we have to really ask ourselves, is there some artistic value in this?
Could you imagine to play concert together with amateur musicians? uh, in one program, just to establish completion between listener and music lover, and us who are making this art and providing this art. Could you imagine this sort of concerts?
I would have to think about it. I would think that encouraging amateur musicians is incredibly important. And I think that there are other ways of building connections to amateur musicians. I'm not sure that I would play a concert together with them, because I do think that the kind of relationship that I have with music is different from the relationship that an amateur musician has. But I absolutely agree that the kind of world that we want is one in which amateur music making is much more prevalent and much more important.
I think just still would like to ask you if you have in your mind an equal writer to Beethoven. So who would it be?
A writer. Oh, at first I was going to say Shakespeare, but in some way I think Shakespeare is more Mozart than Beethoven, because I think of Shakespeare as someone who had this unbelievable understanding of human psychology, and that's Mozart. I'm thinking about Beethoven. It's so difficult because Beethoven, the kind of intensity of Beethoven is, for me, almost unique. Again, I think that there is something about just the sheer force of Beethoven that is, for me anyway, unlike any artist in any other medium.
Indeed.
Yeah.
If you go to the afterlife, and let's say we take one composer and one writer alone, who is it?
It's horrible to have to choose one, but I think it is probably Beethoven for me. It's between Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert are the three that I have to choose between. But I think it's probably Beethoven, because he is the biggest. Not necessarily saying the greatest, but he is the biggest. And if I can only have one writer, oh boy, that's very, very difficult. I think right now, and the answer would change, but if you ask me today, I would say Yeats.
Me too. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm with you. Yeah. Definitely. So I'm really not sure Eliot or Yeats. But probably Yeats, because Eliot is very, very close to me, so he writes like I think, and Yeats is something, but I still don't have this freedom of being really free. So probably yes. I'm completely with you in this. Absolutely. Yeah. So what would we like to leave after us? So we have a difficult situation on the climate. We have crisis. We have a war. We have all horrible things. What for is the art good? Why can't this be cancelled?
Well, I have, as a human being, I always think I want to do what I can to leave the world in a little bit less of a mess than I found it, or a little bit less of a mess than it would be if I weren't in it. That's my only goal, and I think about that in terms of my day-to-day actions as a human being. But I have to say that as an artist, I don't think about a legacy at all. I think I try to live each day in my work as honestly as possible. And I try to feel at the end of the day that I am this much closer to understanding the music that I love and to playing it well than I was yesterday. And then one day I will die, and that will be that. I really have to say I don't think about it beyond
that. Yeah, right. But still, I would like to have an answer for question. Why is the art needed in the art of classical?
Yes.
About music, but still in the pandemics, there was always a question, do we need this classical art? Do we need this music actually? If we have several recordings, like 100 years back, why does it have to be made again, played again. Why someone has to go and study music? And here at this point, I must say, sometimes also by teaching professional students, I'm asking myself this question every single day.
Yeah.
And again, I'm convinced that yes, it has a place, it has to be here, because the art is a good, it's a humanity good. It's something that differs a person, a human being, from a state of primacy. It is something where we are godlike, if you like it. This is this holy grail which makes us immortal. It's filled with spirits of immortality, and it will be, and that's why. It's to me. What about you?
I'll give you a small answer and then the big answer. So because you mentioned the pandemic, I was very touched that at the very beginning of the pandemic, because like everyone else, I had no idea what to do. I'm not a social media person basically at all, but every day I posted just a movement of Beethoven, that I played on my bad piano in my house, bad out of tune piano. And I did it every day for about 6 weeks. And there were several people who wrote comments along the lines of, "Thank you. This is the only thing that I look forward to in my day," which I have to say, it's very sad, but it also was, I was extremely moved by that. But the larger answer is that I think great art, and for me especially great music, it has something to tell us about who we are as human beings that cannot be said through science or religion, or certainly not technology, any of the other means we have of trying to understand who we are and what our place is. Music, the arts, and specifically music, it speaks in a very specific way. And when I listen to or play the music that I love the most, I am in contact with my essence as a person, my desires, my vulnerability, my fear, and I feel that we are richer and better off for studying art, for continuing to study art. I know if I speak about myself, I shudder to imagine who I would be if I didn't have music. And so I think for that reason alone, it's vital that this remain a part of our culture and that we continue to nurture it.
Yeah, I agree totally. Just a little bit more to you before we go on to our day. When you go and play, is it more about you? Are you projecting your feelings and emotions? Or do you feel yourself more as a servant of a composer on stage?
I wouldn't say servant, but I would say maybe vessel. That the music, the composer's world, hopefully becomes a living, breathing thing because I'm there. And I don't like the word servant in this context, because that makes it sound like my role is passive. I think in the end, if you play great music, you inevitably express a huge part of yourself by playing it, but that's not the goal. The goal is to bring this document of someone else's soul to life.
Are you nervous when you're going to stage?
Yes, always, absolutely, yeah. And there were years where it was crippling, and no longer. Now I would say it's almost entirely a positive thing. It means that I'm living in a heightened state. Yeah.
Are you afraid to make mistakes?
Yes, I've had to train myself very hard to be free to make mistakes, because I live in this world where there is this terror of mistakes and feeling that people should be perfect. But I know in my gut that if I'm not willing to make mistakes, then nothing interesting will ever happen.
And that's what I really like. So let's encourage everyone who likes to perform and play to do so, and be in knowledge that everyone, and you and me, and Richter are in the same state. We're all people and artists. And that's why I would like to thank you for your marvelous, marvelous album and for this interview and be talking to me. And I'm looking forward terribly much to be in person in one of your concerts.
Thank you so much. It was a really, really a very interesting conversation and a pleasure to talk.